I gave my life for them, and today no one sees me. The city that locked old people behind mirrors had a silent rule. After 65, you only existed in your reflection. Marlene discovered this the day she stopped appearing in family photographs, literally, as if the camera had learned to automatically edit out inconvenient people. 40 years as a nurse, saving lives, holding hands in the wee hours of the morning, being the angel families asked to care for their loved ones. Now, at 71, she walks the same corridors of the hospital where she worked, and people pass through her body as if it were vapor. If you've ever felt transparent in a crowd, leave a like. Your loneliness needs to echo here. Subscribe, because together we are visible. Comment where you're watching from and the name of someone who has become invisible. Because what you'll discover about this city will make you question everything about aging in the 21st century. Mirrors began to appear everywhere. On hospital walls, in apartment building elevators, in stores, in banks, always at the exact eye level of anyone over 65. And there was something strange about these mirrors. They reflected only half the people. The young, useful, productive half. The other half, the experienced, the wise, the one who had built it all, simply disappeared into the mirrored surface. Marlene didn't understand at first. She thought it was fatigue, distraction, a vision problem. But then she noticed the pattern. Every time she approached someone, they instinctively glanced at the nearest mirror, as if needing confirmation that there was only one visible person there. As if Marlene were a ghost, still insisting on occupying space among the living. The question no one asked, but everyone knew the answer to, echoed through the mirrored corridors. How many of us are slowly being erased from reality? And why do we accept this as if it were natural? Marlene Furtado had dedicated 40 years of her life to São Vicente Hospital. 40 years waking up at 5 in the morning, taking 3 buses to arrive promptly at 6:15. 40 years watching families fall apart and rebuild themselves amidst gurneys and hallways that smelled of disinfectant and hope. She was the kind of nurse who knew every patient's name, who kept whispered secrets in ICU beds, who held trembling hands when family couldn't be there. For 4 decades, Marlene was the silent constant that made that place run. She knew every doctor since her residency, had trained younger nurses who now held leadership positions, knew where every medication was stored, even in the dark. She was the living memory of that hospital, the person everyone turned to when they needed to know how things really worked. But Marlene didn't realize that this expertise, this irreplaceable experience, had become an uncomfortable burden for an institution that needed to run ever faster. Her slow wisdom contrasted with the mechanical efficiency required by the new protocols. Her human stories disrupted the streamlined flow of care. And gradually, without official announcement, Marlene began to discover that she had become obsolete in her own field of expertise. Retirement arrived like a liberation no one had asked for. "You deserve to rest," they said with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Enjoy life," advised colleagues who could barely hide their relief. Marlene left the hospital on a rainy Friday, carrying a box containing 4 decades of memories reduced to a few personal items and a certificate of services rendered. On Monday, for the first time in 40 years, she had nowhere to go at 6 in the morning. The silent house echoed with a freedom she didn't know how to use. The first few months were sweet. Marlene woke up slowly, drank coffee slowly, organized old photos, visited friends. She felt deserved this rest. But slowly, she began to notice something disturbing. People stopped asking about her life. Conversations became shorter, more superficial, as if by stopping working, she had lost the right to interesting experiences. "How's retirement?" became the only question anyone asked her, as if her entire identity had been reduced to this new social status. Marlene discovered she had ceased to be a person and had become a category, retired. And this category, apparently, didn't deserve the same attention, the same respect, the same curiosity that experienced nurse received. And that's when she began to disappear. Not physically, that would be too simple. Marlene's disappearance was more subtle and therefore more cruel. It began with small signs she tried to ignore. The pharmacist, who always greeted her warmly, now barely looked up from her computer. The baker, who kept her warm French bread for her, began treating her like any other anonymous customer. Neighbors who stopped to chat about their grandchildren began to quicken their pace when they saw her approaching. It wasn't hostility. It was something worse. It was absolute indifference, as if she had lost the ability to be interesting, relevant, worthy of attention. Marlene began to observe herself in store mirrors and noticed something disturbing. She was beginning to see herself differently, not as the respected nurse she had been, but as the inconvenient figure she had apparently become. The mirrors returned the image of a woman who occupied space without clear justification, who existed without a defined social function, who had lost the right to an active presence in the world. And perhaps the most painful part was realizing that this transformation wasn't just coming from outside. She was internalizing her own irrelevance, accepting the role of social ghost that had been assigned to her. No one saw him anymore, but he still moved between rooms. Marlene realized she wasn't alone in this experience when she began frequenting the city center during the day. There, she discovered a whole population of people like her, formerly respected. Professionals who now wandered the public spaces like shadows searching for purpose. There was the former accountant who sat on the same park bench every day, pretending to read the newspaper but actually observing the movements of people still in a hurry. The former teacher who walked the mall corridors as if she were still supervising children at recess. The former engineer who stopped to observe construction work on the street, offering advice that no one asked for or listened to. All of them. Ghosts from their own professional lives, trying to find ways to still be useful in a world that had decided it no longer needed them. Marlene began to understand that the problem wasn't individual, it was systemic. Society had created a perfect mechanism for discarding their living memories. To get rid of the people who knew the inconvenient stories, who remembered how things used to be, who represented the uncomfortable continuity between past and present, it was easier to make them invisible than to deal with the complexity of integrating them into a society too fast-paced to value experience. There was a memory Marlene treasured, like a secret treasure, proof that she had once been essential in someone's life. It was from a December dawn 15 years ago. A young mother had arrived at the hospital with her 3-year-old son in a febrile convulsion. The child was unconscious, the mother hysterical, and the doctor on duty was an inexperienced resident who clearly didn't know how to handle the situation. Marlene silently took control. She organized the medication, calmed the mother, monitored the child's vital signs, and stayed by his bedside until dawn. When the boy woke and smiled at her, Marlene felt a completeness no personal achievement had ever brought. The mother wept with relief and held her hands, saying, "You saved my son. How can I thank you?" In that moment, Marlene knew exactly who she was and why she existed. She was the person who stayed when everyone else left, the one who knew what to do when no one else did. The memory remained crystal clear, bright, perfect, but now it served only as a cruel contrast to her current reality. That same child, now an 18-year-old, would probably pass her on the street without recognizing her. And her mother, if she still remembered the episode, certainly wouldn't associate that heroic nurse with the retired woman who now walked invisibly through the same streets. Time had erased not only the memories of others, but apparently Marlene's right to claim that story as her own. Mirrors multiplied throughout the city like a silent epidemic. Marlene began to notice that they always appeared in the places where the elderly frequented most. At the entrance to the bank where they came to receive their pensions. At the bus stops where they used to go to the hospitals. At the pharmacies where they bought their medicines. And all these mirrors had the same disturbing characteristic. They reflected, selectively. They showed young, productive people with crystal clarity, but distorted, blurred, or simply omitted older people. As if the city had developed a visual system that automatically edited its uncomfortable memories. Marlene tested this theory repeatedly. She would stand in front of the mirrors with younger people and observe. She appeared blurry, translucent, while others appeared sharp and well-defined. It wasn't paranoia, it was a real phenomenon that no one openly discussed, as if everyone had tacitly agreed to pretend they didn't notice. The mirrors were the physical embodiment of something already happening at the social level, the systematic erasure of the elderly in the urban landscape. The city had found a way to deal with population aging without actually having to address it. It simply made older people progressively invisible until they themselves accepted this status and stopped trying to occupy spaces that no longer belonged to them. The city didn't ban old people. It just pretended they weren't there anymore. Marlene discovered this when she tried to resume some activities she'd put off during her years of intense work. She wanted to enroll in a painting class, but the receptionist looked at her with surprise, as if people her age weren't entitled to new hobbies. "Are you sure you can keep up?" he asked, with a condescending smile. She tried attending a book group, but found that the discussions always subtly excluded her. Not intentionally. People simply couldn't imagine her having relevant opinions on contemporary books, as if retirement had shut down her ability to have interesting thoughts. Marlene realized she had been categorized as elderly, and this category came with invisible but inflexible social limitations. She could exist in specific spaces, park benches, rows of banks, doctors' offices, but she couldn't aspire to occupy spaces of growth, learning, or simply enjoyment. She had become a permanent spectator of the life that continued to happen around her, but in which she could no longer actively participate. The city had created a perfect system of age apartheid, where old people were guaranteed basic rights, but lost the fundamental right to social relevance. Being old here wasn't a crime. It was a punishment. A social sentence no one had officially pronounced, but which everyone carried out with frightening efficiency. Marlene began to observe how this punishment worked in practice. It was enforced through daily microaggressions. The waiter who took extra time to take her order, as if she had infinite time. The saleswoman who explained simple products with exaggerated patience, as if she had lost the ability to understand basic concepts. The younger people who spoke about her in the third person when she was present. "Would you like to?" As if she were incapable of speaking for herself. Every social interaction had become a subtle reminder that she had transgressed some unwritten rule, that of remaining relevant beyond the socially acceptable time frame. Marlene understood that she had committed the crime of aging in a society that worshipped youth and despised experience, that valued speed over wisdom, novelty over accumulated knowledge. And the punishment for this crime was to be systematically erased from the collective narrative, to be treated as a living relic, interesting only as a historical curiosity, but without the right to an active voice in the present. It was a sophisticated form of social violence, killing someone socially while keeping their body functioning, forcing them to watch their own irrelevance being built brick by the very people who once depended on them. He didn't ask for anything. He just wanted to be called by his name. Marlene discovered this when she realized people had stopped using her name. Now she was "ma'am," "you," or simply a polite nod, as if calling someone by their name created an intimacy no one was willing to sustain with someone at the end of their social career. There was a specific cruelty in this depersonalization. Marlene Furtado, a name that carried 71 years of history, 4 decades of professional dedication, and thousands of lives touched, had been reduced to a generic category. The retiree, the elderly woman, the lady from 302, as if her individuality had an expiration date, as if, by ceasing to be economically productive, she had lost the right to her own identity. Marlene began to test this theory. She introduced herself deliberately. "Hi, I'm Marlene." People repeated the name once out of politeness and then never used it again. It was as if the name were too dangerous, creating emotional bonds no one wanted to acknowledge. Easier to maintain a safe distance from the impersonal category. But in the silent early mornings, when the insomnia of age kept her awake, Marlene still whispered to herself, "I am Marlene Furtado. I saved lives. I made a difference." Like a mantra against oblivion, like a silent resistance against systematic depersonalization. In the city of faded mirrors, she knew she would be next. Marlene discovered she wasn't just observing her own invisibility, she was witnessing a collective phenomenon. The city had developed an efficient system for dealing with population aging, progressive symbolic elimination. The elderly weren't physically killed, that would be too barbaric for a civilized society. Instead, their social relevance, their ability to influence decisions, their right to a voice were eliminated. It was a symbolic genocide executed with the quiet efficiency of a well-planned program. Marlene observed other elderly people and recognized in their eyes the same process of progressive erasure. Donna Carmen, who had been a school principal for 30 years and was now treated like a child requiring constant supervision. So Roberto, a former chief engineer who offered technical advice that no one took seriously anymore. All of them involuntarily participating in a collective ritual of disappearance. A social ceremony where the community shed its uncomfortable memories without taking individual responsibility. Each person contributed small acts of negligence that, combined, created absolute exclusion. And the most perverse part was that the elderly themselves internalized this exclusion, accepting as natural something that was in fact a cruel and unnecessary social construct. The silence in the house had a texture all its own. It wasn't just an absence of sound, it was a presence of abandonment. Marlene had spent 4 decades waking up with the urgency to save lives, to be present in other people's most critical moments. Now she woke up with no one needing her. The phone that once rang constantly with hospital emergencies now remained silent for days on end. Her schedule, once packed with shifts and professional commitments, now had blank pages that stretched on forever. She tried to fill this void with activities, television, reading, walks, but nothing could replace the feeling of being needed, of having a purpose, of making a difference in someone's life. Marlene discovered she had confused her identity with her profession so profoundly that she no longer knew who she was without the uniform, without the responsibility, without the urgency. It was as if she had spent 70 years preparing for a test that had been canceled without warning. All those skills, all that experience, all that accumulated wisdom had nowhere to be applied. Society had decided she was a dead file, historically important but irrelevant to the present. And perhaps the most painful part was discovering that no one would miss her if she simply ceased to exist. That her absence would create no perceptible void in the functioning of the world. She was still waiting for a call. It didn't even have to be a loving one. Just a call. Anyone who said, "Marlene, I need your opinion." Or, "Marlene, can you help?" Me? Or simply, "Marlene, how are you?" But the phone remained silent, a monument to irrelevance. Marlene began to understand that she had dedicated so much time to caring for others that she had forgotten to build a network of people who cared about her as a person, not just as a professional. Her friendships had been mostly work-related, and when work ended, those friendships naturally dissolved. Not out of malice, but because there was nothing left to share. Her family relationships were cordial but distant, a niece who called on her birthday, cousins who showed up at Christmas. Nothing that created the feeling of being truly important in anyone's life. Marlene discovered that she had built a professionally rich but emotionally fragile life. That she had been essential to hundreds of people in critical moments, but had failed to be essential to anyone in everyday moments. And now, when she needed human connection, she found she didn't know how to ask for it, how to create it, how to sustain relationships that weren't based on medical necessity or a hospital emergency. The silent phone was the perfect symbol of a lifetime dedicated to others that had resulted in absolute solitude, dedicated only to herself. Marlene still lives in apartment 302 of the building she moved into when she retired. She still wakes up every day, still dresses with the same care she had when she had to wear a uniform, still walks the streets of the city she helped build through the care of its people. But she understood something no one prepares us for, that we can become ghosts long before we die, that there is a social, symbolic, progressive death, where we continue to breathe but lose the right to matter, where our hearts beat but our opinions cease to have value, where our eyes see but no one sees us anymore. The city of mirrors that erase old people is not a metaphor. It is our daily reality. Every time we look away from an elderly person, every time we talk about them as if they were not present, every time we assume they no longer have anything interesting to offer, we are polishing these cruel mirrors. We are building our own future invisibility. Marlene looks out the window and sees young nurses rushing to the hospital where she dedicated her life. And they know that one day, each of them will discover the same truth, that a society that discards its living memories is doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over, that a culture that treats experience as obsolescence is destined for perpetual immaturity. The question echoing through the city's mirrored corridors has no easy answer. When did we decide that aging was synonymous with disappearing? And is there still time to break these mirrors before they reflect our own irrelevance? If you know someone experiencing this silence, write their name in the comments, like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. This isn't just a video, it's a memory recovery. Maybe a name here in the comments will bring someone back to mind.